So I'm going to give this talk. I hope it's worth the wait. That I wanted to give at the ANA, but we ran out of time. This is a interesting plaquette that I got before I really dove into metals wholeheartedly, because it refers to the campus at the University of California at Berkeley. And I work in Berkeley above the campus at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And so it was sort of local interest, but now since I've been a part of the MCA, I've come to appreciate some of the finer points of these French Art Nouveau kind of metals. And so I'm calling this Roma Pacifica. That title actually is it borrows from an exhibit at one of the local Berkeley museums that talked about the architecture of the campus. So here it is. It's an interesting piece about I think it's 80 millimeters on the long side. You've got Mrs. Hearst. We'll talk about her in a moment on one side, and then something that looks like a campus on the other side, and then a bunch of old white guys on the reverse. And this one is in silver. And here's some of the particulars. So you have the bust of Phoebe Hearst. It's signed by Oscar Roty, the famous French medalist, and has some Latin on it, and which we'll talk about. And then it tells what it's for: this international competition for the Phoebe Hearst architectural plan for the University of California. And then it's got these old white guys, and then it says first prize and E. Bernard, Emile Bernard, and then it's marked on the side, so it's Paris Mint piece. It is, I have no idea what the mintage is. It seems to be small. Looking through auction records, it's only occurred a couple of times. So a little bit about the University of California. At the present day, it's the largest post-secondary academic and research institution in the world. There are 10 independent campuses and 3 national laboratories. I've worked at 2 of them at both Livermore and Berkeley. I've been at Berkeley now for 20 years. The university was established by the state legislature in 1868, but the origins of this institution really go back into the gold rush time in the 1850s, starting with a small school in Oakland. And but in the 1890s, when this medal was made, there was really only one campus, and because of this origins in the 1860s, it's actually a land grant school. Most of the large land grant schools are in the Midwest. I've forgotten some of the names of which ones they are. I think Ohio State maybe. And in the 1890s, the buildings that were there, been there for 30 years or 20 years or so, 30 years, I guess, by the late 1890s. There was just sort of a hodgepodge with no real. It didn't really look like a campus in the classic Oxford kind of way. And so one of the professors began to, a guy named Maybeck, who was an architectural professor, began to investigate, how could we do make a physical campus that was suitable for what they aspired to be as a great university at that time. And so Mrs. Hearst, who we'll talk about in just a minute, actually proposed and financed this contest to redesign the Berkeley campus. So who is Mrs. Hearst? There's a photograph of her. She was a school teacher, a kindergarten teacher in Missouri, and George Hearst was in his 40s and single and very wealthy man, not portrayed rather ruthlessly in the show about called The Tombstone. Which is an interesting Western drama on television. And he went back because his mother was ill to Missouri, and he was smitten by the 20-year-old Phoebe, and married her. 20-year difference or 20-some year difference between ages, And so, of course, he died first, and she became one of the wealthiest women when he passed away in California. And so she had a lot of money, and was fancied herself a philanthropist. And because she had been a teacher, not surprisingly, much of her philanthropy was in education, and she, particularly women in education. But this is a different subject. So officially, it was the Phoebe Hearst architectural plan for the University of California, and here's some of the verbiage that they used to basically encourage architects to submit. And they had a first round, and it was heavily European, of course. There were over 100 entries. The guys, these old guys on the back, they were the judges. And I haven't really found too much information about them. But they selected 12 finalists. And not surprisingly, given the time, they were all sort of Beaux-Arts kind of influences. And here are the results. And you can see the prize money was actually pretty substantial. I mean, in 1899, $10,000 was a lot of money. And this fellow from Paris, Émile Bernard, won. The rest were Americans, but some of them had connections to this Beaux-Arts school in Paris. And so Bernard hadn't been to California. She paid to send some of these 12 finalists to Berkeley to look at the site. Bernard did not come, but he did come to collect the $10,000. Now, he was really not a very pleasant person, apparently. He insulted Mrs. Hearst, which is kind of a bad thing to do. You know, she's the one with all the money, and just about everybody else. And he felt that Berkeley was a crude wilderness. And, I think some people might still agree with that. So he went back to Paris, and there was no actual stipulation that he actually do anything for the 10,000 other than submit, the plans. And they actually did build one house that was situated according to where he thought it should be, and that's called University House. There's a photograph of it. I've never been to it. It originally was for the president of the Berkeley campus. Now the chancellor of the whole system gets to live there. Apparently they live upstairs, and the first floor is all for events and things. It's behind a fence. You can't even see it from the road. But he didn't even design the plan. Some other local architect designed it. It just located where he said it should be located. So because he was not what they really wanted, Mrs. Hearst just selected the one that she liked the best, and this was a guy named John Galen Howard. And so he was selected to implement Bernard's plan, but he really just did his own. And what they call now the classical core of the campus is in this Beaux-Arts style. And the first building that Howard designed was this one, the George Hearst Memorial Mining Building, Hearst being a silver baron. And it houses engineering professors and their lecture halls. And I've actually taught there. It's the entranceway is really quite grand. It's a nice building, one of many actually. So in addition to the silver one, there was a restrike, or a recast actually. It's in bronze, it's smaller, and it's quite clearly cast. And this was made to solicit donations, which the campus is always doing, of course. It's kind of interesting that they decided they had a cast. I mean, the Paris Mint probably still had the dies. It probably would have been cheaper to contract to the mint and have them struck. But of course, these people, the campus doesn't have that many numismatists, and I guess they just didn't know that. And so, in order to make a copy, they cast it. Here's the box that came in, and it refers back to Mrs. Hearst. These are more common than the other one. They're still not particularly obtainable, but I have seen these a lot more. There is an article in one of the A&S magazines when whoever was someone on the staff there, maybe the curator, had been a Berkeley alumnus and had given some money and got one of these, and so he wrote about it in an A&S magazine. Let's talk about the Latin. The first part is really about Mrs. Hearst, and it's a not so subtle reference to her philanthropy. I'm not going to say the Latin because I can't do that, but he said it translates as "Let them praise her in the gates because of her work." It's like, okay, so I'm very generous, and so you should be nice to me. And the back part is a quote from in Latin from Virgil's poem, the Aeneid, which basically means that this contest will be impartial. And so, even though at the end of the day they didn't use the person that won, and the one that she wanted. I went to A&S and because I knew they had some pieces, and Oscar Roty gifted quite a few examples of his work to the A&S. He was a member. And in that, and I didn't know this until I got there, there actually is a bronze one that is exactly the same as the silver one that I have. Maybe it's unique. I don't know. I can't find any in any auction records, but on the other hand, I could only find 3 in silver, and one of those might be a repeat. Looks nice in bronze to me. And then there are a couple of trial pieces of sample casts, I guess, that were made prior to being struck. This one is the one in the A&S, and it's larger. It will be 140 millimeters instead of 80, and Roty donated this as well. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that it's a little different than the actual medal because architect is spelled in French on this big piece, and in English on the one in the end. And there was another one that occurred that appeared, another large piece that was cast in the old presidential coin and antique companies auctions, and it has a different engraving of the French word architect. In fact, it's kind of crude. It looks like it was scratched in at the last moment, and also it has her name next to her portrait, which is not on the A&S large example or on the actual silver and smaller ones. And I'm not done this research because I need to go to the Bancroft Library, which is a library on the campus, and according to the records, they actually have a wax impression at this larger size, or presumably at this larger size, but I haven't seen it yet. Now that the pandemic is sort of subsided, I can actually go there, but I haven't yet. So just to finish up, so this core campus part of the Berkeley site is in the Beaux-Arts style. I used to have an office in one of them. They kicked us out at one point. And her medal is in that sort of style. And I learned that she did visit Paris in the 1890s, and that there's a photo or this photo that I showed looks to be, the jewelry is the same, and the dress appears to be the same. And so it seems that the portrait may be taken from that photo or from another photo that was taken in a similar sitting. And she chose Oscar Roty to be her medalist, and he was famous at this time. And I think it was partly to show that she was a woman of style and substance, and not just a school marm from Missouri. She was new money, as it were. But the rich have their own social circles, and getting in it sometimes you need to have more than just money. And oddly enough, the American medalist John Flanagan was in Paris at the same time. And Scott Miller of the New York Numismatic Club has a perhaps cast medal signed by Flanagan with essentially the same portrait, and so that's sort of an unknown an unknown angle that on this story. So thanks. Here's a picture I took of the of some other buildings that resulted from this architectural competition. This is the Doe Library. Doe was some donor, and then this is the Campanile, which rings at 6 o'clock. That it can be played, and so that's that. So thank you.